Hey guys, Curtis here, tip of the day 57. Today I'm going to cover something I have not seen a lot talked about. I've looked everywhere. I did some research and I don't find a lot on it, but I have done my own homework on this, and this is called the gap of uncertainty. And I want you just to be aware of this. It's a little bit of uncharted territory, to be honest, but from the people I've talked to and the things I've looked into, it's a really neat concept. It starts with, we all know, or maybe not all, but a lot of people know that when balls are frozen, this is a lot of people know that if a ball is frozen together, but this is lined up for here, meaning it's not on. The rule is, if we want to force it over, we can't cut a frozen ball. So what we can do is throw it. So here's something, if you don't know it, if you want, this is not going in, I can't cut it. So what we would do is hit it on this side, okay? So that's the opposite of what you would think, but it'll push it into the pocket. Why does it do that? Because it's frozen in the throws. Here's where we're gonna get a little deep, or we're gonna start to expand the thinking. A lot of people are aware of that principle, but they're not aware of this. If there's a little space, this is the gap of uncertainty, and then it's just a hair, let's call it just off. You still can't cut balls. So, if this is off again, not quite on, I obviously can't show you this, I wish I could. There is a hair, like just off. Still no problem. Even out to, and the gap of uncertainty is gonna be a finger. A full finger, less than a full finger, as a general rule, from what I can see, less than a full finger, I can still use the throw effect. But in this case, most people will go, oh, there's space, I can see it, no problem. So I'll try and cut it, like normal, can't cut. There's still not enough room. So if there's a little bit of space, you still use the same principle. I would shoot in the opposite direction because I still can't cut it. It's gonna throw it in, okay? So space, that's probably the number one takeaway is, tip of the day 57 would be, even when there's a hair of space, just a hair, you can still use the opposite principle. However, here's a real interesting thing, and this is also the secondary part that I haven't heard too many people talk about. The gap of uncertainty is when there's about one finger, exactly one, from what so here's a real interesting thing. It's good to know. This happens at more than you think. When you got about one finger, you can play around with it. You can't cut it either way. That's the gap of uncertainty. You're in trouble. But just knowing that, meaning you can't straighten it out by cutting it, and you can't straighten it out by throwing it. What that is, that gap of uncertainty is about a finger. But how many times does that come up where you thought you could cut it and you couldn't, and you tried both ways? Well, that's because the gap of uncertainty, which is about a finger that I can see, is where if this is not on, got about a finger, I wish I could show you that, it's not on. Now, the problem with this, what's right, is that it's got to be exact, but you can see how it's about a finger, let's just say, if I do this principle, it's not going to work, because you see, that was right on the cusp. It almost wanted to go, even though there was quite a bit of space there, it still started. So that gap of uncertainty, let's call it a finger, very interesting, let's call it a finger. Unfortunately, you couldn't cut it the other way, because again, I'm going to try to cut it. It won't cut it because it's still not there. So so there's just to be aware that there is a point, it's roughly a finger, roughly, to where you can't get it both ways. So I'll try and do it the other way this time. If it's just over, you can do it. But that's the gap right there. Both ways I was throwing it straight. So roughly a finger is a gap of uncertainty, and what that means is you're in trouble, so just understand that. But for sure, a finger or less, or just under a finger, you're still going to be using the opposite. You can't cut it. If it's under a finger, it's always going to be, so here there's a fair amount of space here. Not a finger, but there's still a fair amount of space here, and I'm way out over there. Most people would say there's space. No, you can't cut that. So there's space there. How do I throw that in? It's under, I can throw this in because it's less than a finger. And it's pretty close, right? It started to, it's right on the gap. But again, that's the principle is, just because there's space doesn't mean it can't use the opposite principle, and then finding around a finger. And once there's more than a finger, as a general rule, once there's more than a finger and maybe like a chalk, I would say about a chalk is to when now, like basically I would say let's call it a finger and a half, about a chalk, let's call it a piece of chalk. Then all of a sudden, as a general rule, 2 fingers or chalk, now you can start to do the opposite, right? You see how I cut it there. So over a finger to 2 would be, you could start cutting it. A finger, you're in that gray zone, and anything under a finger, you're doing the opposite. That's tip of the day 57. Hope that was helpful. I know it's a lot of knowledge that's not talked about a lot, so this is going to be something that can come up in a game, and you could have a combo that could win you a game, or so this stuff does come up quite a bit. So that's the gap of uncertainty and how to know with the difference of making those combos.